Welcome everyone. I'm Anna Rownick, the Executive Director of Client and Content Services here at the State Library of Queensland. I'd first like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. It's my pleasure to be here this morning to introduce our guest, Andy Mabbett, and to acknowledge the support of the Australian Wikimedia Foundation, and in particular acknowledge the support of Kerry Raymond, who's here in the audience, our own very Wikimedian in sort of permanent residence sometimes. We're here today to learn more about Wikidata, and I saw a tweet this morning that I thought I'd share. It was someone that was on their way here who said they were coming to the session and looking forward to talk more about the craft of what Wikidata and the wizardry, which I thought was a really apt way of describing the process. When I looked it up on Wikidata, one of the first descriptions I saw was, it's a free and open knowledge base, and really that's all I needed to look at, as I'm sure the librarians and people that are here would also acknowledge. That's why we're here. We're interested in ensuring that our content and our information is openly accessible and reusable, and we need to understand what our role is in that space. This morning's presentation will go for an hour, and there'll be time for questions, which Andy will manage. After the session, there'll be a morning tea where you can continue the conversation. For those booked into the workshop, that will start at 11 at the Edge. And this morning's presentation's been recorded and will be made available to people that are here and online. So I encourage you, it's probably an opportunity to revisit some of the content with your colleagues, but please share. So let's just get started. Please join me in welcoming Andy to the stage.
Thank you, Anne. And thank you all for the honour of being invited to speak at this wonderful venue in this wonderful city. Wiki loves libraries. I'll explain why. But first of all, I want us to reflect on why we're here. This is the vision statement for the Wikimedia Foundation, the organisation that hosts Wikipedia and Wikidata and its sister projects. And we want to imagine a world in which every single human being can freely share in the sum of all knowledge. I'm not going to read all my slides out to you, but I really think it's important that we make that point. If that isn't the kind of reason why you're in libraries or in other GLAMs, then you're in the wrong job, because this is what we're all about, preserving knowledge and making it available to people. I know there are some who would have everything locked away in cabinets and never let anybody look at it because it would preserve it perfectly, but that's really not why we're here. And it's the sharing of knowledge, which all of what I'm about to tell you and all that we do as Wikimedians is about, and I hope it's what it's about for you as librarians and GLAM professionals. As a matter of interest, how many of you are in libraries? And how many of you are in different sorts of GLAMs? Oh, one or two, good. Okay, well, over coffee perhaps we'll find out exactly where. I woke up this morning ridiculously early because of the Australian dawn chorus, and lay in bed and checked Facebook and saw this breaking story on all the Wikipedia discussion groups. And so I whipped out my laptop and edited my slides, because I thought, although this is, you can see the date at the bottom, it is today's story, or yesterday's, sorry. But this is quite a crucial thing. The Tate Gallery in London, or the Tate Galleries are actually a collection of several now, have decided to stop writing biographies of artists other than the few that they have major collections for, because Wikipedia does it equally well, and they don't have the resource or the expertise necessarily, or the resource in terms of time or the resource in terms of materials to create biographies for artists where they've got one work or there's a temporary exhibition. They are simply going to import content from Wikipedia. And if it's good enough for the Tate Gallery, I hope it's good enough for all your institutions. And certainly for others around the world. And other people do that as well. The National Archives in America and the BBC work with Wikipedia and use Wikipedia content. So we play the big game. Wikipedia is one of the top 5 or 6 websites in the world in terms of traffic and page impressions. So we're really up there. This is not a pocket instance. It's not a little amateur project. It's amateur in the sense that it's done by volunteers who aren't paid, but it's also amateur in the sense of something done for love and done to the highest quality possible. So that's our little bit of breaking news. And in order to talk about Wikidata, which is why I'm really here today, I have to first of all take a step back and talk about Wikipedia to set some context. And when I used to do these talks years ago, I used to say, hands up everybody who's used Wikipedia. I don't do that anymore for reasons that you can hopefully guess. But what is Wikipedia? Well, it's an online encyclopedia. It's a free encyclopedia, free to use, free to edit, free to reuse, and anybody can edit it. So it is crowdsourced, but that anybody isn't just Joe Public. It is librarians and archivists and museum curators and academics and professionals, all strata of society and all fields and disciplines. And it is one of a dozen or more projects hosted and looked after by the Wikimedia Foundation in America, which is a not-for-profit. So they do the nuts and bolts. They keep the computers running, they provide the bandwidth, they provide the electricity and the air conditioning to stop the servers from blowing up with the heat. And they collect donations. If you're a donor, thank you very much, which pay for things like my airfare to come here and talk to you, and conferences and grants for volunteers to do good work. But that's as much as the Wikimedia Foundation do. They do not look after the content. That is left to the community of volunteers to do, with a few very minor exceptions where there are legal or child protection issues, but they're so small and infrequent that you can statistically discard them. So the content is done by the community. And although we talk about Wikipedia in the singular, there are around 300 Wikipedias. You all know the English language Wikipedia. There's French and German and Russian and Japanese and several into the Indonesian languages and many others besides. And there are starting to emerge what we call, I can't remember what the word is, but we have developing Wikipedias that are not quite so public in some of the Australian native languages. So they will start to emerge as proper Wikipedias as the content grows and as the community behind them grows as well. I know the Noongar people in Western Australia are very keen on this. So that's Wikipedia, 300 of them. And then there are some other projects besides, which I will delve into as I go through my presentation and explain. But the newest project, and the one that has the most rapid growth, is Wikidata. So, again, to set the context of what Wikidata is, we look at Wikipedia, and I hope you all know these info boxes that you see in the corners in the top right-hand side of Wikipedia articles. This is the one for Claude Monet, the famous French Impressionist painter. You all knew that anyway, didn't you? And you can see, if I expand it a little bit, it has all the bare statistics, where he was born, where he died, when he was born and when he died, who he was married to, what he's known for, his nationality, the fact that he was a painter and not a sculptor or an airline pilot or whatever. All that is fairly basic and unequivocal fact. And we have it all there in this little box where you can read it off quite quickly if you're in a hurry to see have you got the right page, or you just want to find a date of birth quite quickly. And on the French Wikipedia, we have the same thing with all the same data. And in lots of other languages as well. And because these have grown organically, each of them was edited separately with the same data being entered by different people. And you imagine if you are commissioned by your boss to set up a database at work, and you say, well, I've set the database up, boss, I'll show you how it works. You just put the information in here, and here, and here, and here, and here, and you do this 300 times and the job's done. You'd be out on your ear very quickly, because it would be complete professional incompetence. But that's what we were doing in Wikipedia by accident. So a bunch of us said, well, we really ought to centralize this. We do it for our images on Wikipedia. They all go onto a project called Wikimedia Commons. So the picture of Claude Monet is stored once and then transcluded or pulled into each Wikipedia where it's needed. Excuse me. So let us do the same for the data. And if we're going to do that, let's share it with everybody else and let them use it for other things as well, because that's what we do. We're Wikipedians. We want to share the sum of all knowledge. So we gathered all the data about Claude Monet, and we put it onto a page on Wikidata. You can all read that, can't you? No? Okay. It's rather long. So let me zoom in. It looks like this. It's a different interface to Wikipedia and some of the sister projects which you're more familiar with, but it uses the same underlying software with some additional plugins. And if I zoom in again, just to make it a little easier for us to read, the first thing is we have a label in English, And for Claude Monet, the label is the same in every language that uses the Western alphabet. But where you're talking about an item like cheese or beer, obviously it's different in every language. And you have a description here, which is also in English in this case. It's in English because my interface is set to use English because I'm an Englishman, so I only speak one language. And you have aliases, so all the different ways in which his name could be spelt or the different terms by which he's known. And you have a reference number, Q296, what we call the QID or the QUID. And the QID is a unique identifier. It's an authority control in its own right. It forms the stem of the URL. Because labels are different in different languages, we don't use any text as the identifier in the URL for the web page or for the online form of the data. We use those QIDs. So straight away, there is a useful identifier that you can use in your authority control systems to triangulate between different databases. And you can refer to that when you're electronically, your computers are talking to other computers to say, are we talking about the same subject? Can we amalgamate our data based on this identifier? And a large number of organizations, of which we have a list online, are already using those identifiers for that purpose. And then we have a bunch of statements about Claude Monet, which I'll look at in a little more detail. But straight away we have an instance of a human, and his sex or gender is male. Fairly unequivocal things again. The instance of is quite important. Everything in Wikidata is either an instance of something. So Queensland State Library is an instance of a library. Or it's a subclass of something. So a Boeing 747 is a subclass of a Boeing airliner because there are more than one instances of that, one of which you've been on your holidays on. The one next to it was a different instance, but as a concept, it's a subclass. So the distinction between instances and subclasses is very important in Wikidata. I've already mentioned that we have these multilingual labels, and here you can see a few of them. The descriptions are missing in some languages, the aliases are missing in some. How many of you can read and write a language other than English? Okay, extra homework for you is to go in and add labels and descriptions on Wikidata. It's really easy. If you want a little 5-minute job when you're in a boring meeting at work or a boring presentation, so I hope nobody's doing it now, there's a little thing you can do to help Wikidata out and to practice using that language skill if that's what you want to do. We have statements with references, just like Wikipedia. You all know the famous citation needed tag in Wikipedia. So here we have the fact that Claude Monet is an instance of a human is stated in the French authority control records, and is stated in the artist list of the National Museum of Sweden. We only need a couple. We don't need to list everything that says he's a human being, but a couple of those are quite useful for verifying facts. And when you get onto the more potentially contentious things like people's dates of birth or what religion did somebody have, then having references and on the statements is very important. We all know that librarians are good at finding references. I said Wikipedia loves libraries, this is why. Or it's one of the reasons why, I should say. And we have qualifiers. So some of the statements are qualified. This is only true according to these set of circumstances. This only applies in this country. Or as you can see here, this spouse of Claude Monet began being their spouse in 1870. In other words, that was the year they married. And she was spouse number 1. Claude Monet later remarried, so we had spouse number 2. He's not a bigamist, there was a divorce or a death beforehand, but we can add qualifiers to statements, and that's very important indeed. And we can also give statements a rank, so we can say something is a preferred statement or a deprecated statement rather than having regular rank. So we might say Claude Monet was also, I don't know, a medical doctor, but that statement is deprecated because the source that we give turned out to be wrong, and the reason for deprecation is that it was later corrected. So we can record that an external source says something which we no longer believe to be true, which again is very important when you're building a complex database about historical facts and figures. And we store lots of identifiers. Librarians love identifiers as well as Wikipedians, I'm sure. We store all the identifiers we can find in reputable databases and online websites, and that enables further triangulation. So if you want to say, I've got a VIAF for this person, and I've got another record in another database that has an ISNI identifier but not a VIAF, how can I check they're the same? You can use Wikidata to see, do we have both of those identifiers there? And we would like you to help us put identifiers on things where you have them and we don't. I'll talk about how we can do that a little bit later. And this little template on Wikipedia excuse me, lists all the identifiers that are specific to Australia. I'm not going to read all that out to you. I will make my slides available, but just to pull out a couple from the Queensland, from the Queensland area, the Heritage Register, the Place ID, the Australian Football Hall of Fame, inductee ID. You can see the Northern Territories there really aren't pulling their weight on this one, by the way. So if you've got any friends up there, have a word. We can create new properties in Wikidata if people propose them to us, and that's for identifiers or for other values. So we have all these for Australia, as well as global identifiers, of course, like VIAF and ISNI and ORCID and others. And as I say, we create properties the same way we create ordinary items, but they have a P rather than a Q value, P for property, and we specify them in the same way. They're an instance of something, they have other values, who runs them, how many there are in the world, the URL format that you add the identifier to make a working web link and so on, in exactly the same way as we do for ordinary items in Wikidata. And we have thousands of properties, about 5,500 the last time I looked a week or two ago. And some of those properties, as we've seen already, are about statements of facts, not just identifiers. So whether somebody is a spouse or whether they're what their occupation was or where they were born. Those are all properties in Wikidata. I mentioned earlier that Wikipedia is a free resource. This applies also to Wikidata. In fact, Wikidata is under a public domain or CC0 license. We want people to take the data and reuse it. You can do it freely. You don't even have to give attribution, because often if you're pulling data into another database, it's not convenient to say where you got that data from. We would still like you to do it. If you run a project using data from Wikidata, somewhere on the About page, please tell people that, because it helps make people aware of how we work. And if you can write a blog post about what you've done, we can add that to our library of case studies, which will help other people in the future. But you don't have to give attribution. And for those of you who have a technical bent, there are a number of ways in which you can retrieve data from Wikidata. You can look it up on a web page as a human being, or you can instruct your computer systems to do it for you using Sparkle, using our API. We have data URIs, so if you have the you have the word entity in the URL, or the URI I should say, then we know that you'll be returned data rather than a human readable web page. You can have data dumps. You can take the entire database, which is several gigabytes, or you can have incremental updates, or you can have a database dump built, which is just the artists or just the material related to Australia or whatever you want to get out of it. And that's all freely available. You just have to find somewhere to put it when you get all that data. So what do we have items about in Wikidata? Well, we've already seen a person, Claude Monet. We have items about places, Brisbane, Chapel Hill, that field over there, whatever it might be. Artworks, we're very big on items about artworks. We have a project called the Sum of All Paintings, which is building a corpus of data about paintings and sculptures and other artworks, each individually described in Wikidata. We have buildings, organisations, which of course includes museums and libraries, so you need to make sure your organisation has an item about it. I'm not going to read all of these to you. You can see them all there. There are a couple that I'll return to later, works and journals. And we have some meta items, so things like the properties and sets within Wikidata and Wikidata projects have items to help us to manage them internally. We don't have a limit on having only items for things that have a Wikipedia article. So everything that has a Wikipedia article has a Wikidata item. But some Wikipedia articles describe multiple concepts. So you might, for instance, have a Wikipedia article, list of public statues in Brisbane. But each one of those statues will have a Wikidata item, and each of the artists will have a Wikidata item, even if they don't have a Wikipedia article, which of course they may do. So you have far more items. We've imported catalogues of artworks from an art gallery with an item for every artwork in the gallery, even though there's only a Wikipedia article about the collection. So that gives you an idea of the vast scope of this project. And to give you a couple of examples, very quickly, there's an institution, the Queensland Art Gallery, and there's an artwork. This is the one that's actually in London, one of my favourite paintings. And like the Claude Monet screenshot I showed you earlier, which was very, very long and you couldn't read it because the print was so small, there's a lot of information about each of these institutions or objects and everything else on Wikidata. And like Wikipedia articles, they grow. People can keep adding stuff to them incrementally as new material comes to light, new identifiers, new statistics, new measurements, whatever it might be, we can keep adding. And I showed you the info box for Claude Monet at the beginning of my talk. This is the info box for the painting I just showed you, but unlike the one for Claude Monet, which is still a manually edited one, all of this data is drawn out of Wikidata. So how many of you edit Wikipedia using the actual code editor? Some of you? One or two? This is one piece of code that just says put the info box here. Curly brackets, info box painting / Wikidata curly brackets, and that's it. And then it fetches all the data from Wikidata for you. And so you can then put the same code into the Indonesian language Wikipedia, the Swahili Wikipedia, the Chinese Wikipedia, whatever it might be, and the same data will appear. But because of all those labels being multilingual, including the labels that are the names of the properties and the values, they will all appear in the user's language in the correct Wikipedia. We have wiki projects on Wikidata. These are collective groups of editors who band together to work on something to a common standard. So there are no formal standards, but a group of editors will collectively say, if we're going to describe paintings, for instance in this case, we ought to say who the artist is, how wide and how tall it is, what materials are used, and this is the preferred way that we ought to do it. And these projects are useful if you're trying to describe something you've never described before in Wikidata, or if you want to work with a bunch of people on a particular topic and you need to know where can I go to find the other people who have the same interest. So if you're looking, there is probably a wiki project for Australians on Wikidata, there is probably a wiki project for literature on Wikidata, if not for Australian literature, and so on. So most of the major topic areas will have a project, most of the major places. Some of them get more granular. You might have a Brisbane wiki project rather than an Australian one. And if there isn't one, you can set one up. So you can get help and support through that mechanism. Now, I said I was going to talk about some of the projects other than Wikidata. And one that's closely allied is Wikimedia Commons. This is where we put all the images, all the video, all the audio, PDF documents, spreadsheet files of tabulated data that doesn't go in Wikidata but can live on Wikimedia Commons, and more. And a number of institutions, this is the Rijksmuseum, have said, okay, have all our images. We will help you with the upload, or we will do it ourselves. We'll give you high resolution files. The Rijksmuseum have an excellent case study about it. They've written a paper as to why they gave all their images away like that and how it benefits them in terms of better understanding of their collections and more visitors through the front door. Sometimes people say, well, if we put this online, people won't come and visit us. Well, everybody's seen the Mona Lisa online, but there are still queues at the Louvre to see her as well. So Wikimedia Commons, very closely allied to Wikidata, and the reason is we're currently working on a project called Structured Data on Wikimedia Commons, and doesn't that trip off the tongue, which is to apply a replication of Wikidata to Wikimedia Commons to hold all the data about every image on Commons. So not just the object that is depicted, but the image that depicts it. So if I took a photograph of this library and somebody else here took a photograph of the library, there'll be two entries in Wikidata saying who the photographer is and what camera they used and what the aperture setting was and what the date was and where the coordinates of the camera were and so on. And this is work in progress. So if you want to contribute to the discussion, you can do. But within a year, this will be, in fact, probably much less than that now, this will be up and running, and it will cross-link with Wikidata. So if the photographer is famous and there's a Wikidata item, there'll be a cross-link. If the camera is a Nikon D3000, there'll be a cross-link to the Wikidata item about that camera. Those of you who work with linked data will recognize what I'm talking about here. So that's Wikimedia Commons. How do you get the data out of Wikidata? This is where some of you will start to get scared. You use, in the first instance, something called Sparkle. I forget the acronym, but it's something query language. And it's not as scary as it looks. because we have a wizard. We were talking about wizards earlier. We have a software wizard that will guide you through the process, and we have a community of human wizards who will also help you or write the queries for you if you get stuck. And obviously in doing so, they will try to teach you how to do it, but if you can't pick that up or you're too busy, that's not a problem. So here's what the wizard looks like. I'm going to expand that one side of the screen, then the other. When you're very proficient at this, and I don't claim to be at all, you can just write a query like this, and some of my friends do that. And you'll see in that query Q numbers and P numbers that are referring to properties and items. So this is saying, give me all the things that are a museum in Queensland, I think. So you're just specifying what you want. But if you can't write this off the top of your head, you use this wizard, and there it is. Give me all the instances or subclasses of museums. So something might be an instance of museum, or it might be an instance of a transport museum, and transport museum is a subclass of museum. I mentioned earlier how that works. And then located in the administrative territorial entity, in other words, where is it? Queensland. And give me the coordinates as well. So you just start typing this and it gives you a menu which you can use to autocomplete, or you can paste in QIDs if you know them and p-values if you know them. But it's really straightforward. There are some very complex queries that use almost programming language levels of skills, but you don't need to worry about that most of the time. To repeat what I said earlier, if you do, there is a page where you can go and ask and say, I need a query that does this. Can somebody help me write it, or can somebody write it for me? So whichever avenue you choose to go down, there is help available. Obviously, if you're asking someone to do it for you, you might have to wait longer than if you're doing it yourself, but I find within 24 hours and often less, somebody has written the query and provided you the answer, or even said, well, you can't do it that way, but how about doing it this other way instead? When you run that query, you get this list. You remember I said we'd ask for the coordinates? They're in the right-hand column. This is part of a much longer list. I could only fit so much on the screen, but that's how it's presented. And if you want to, you can export that straight into a spreadsheet or get it as XML or JSON or some of the other nice technical things you can do with that data in order to plug it in somewhere else. Or you can click on a button and say, I'd rather have it as a map. And for different types of query, you can get your data as a bar chart or a pie chart or a bubble chart or a timeline. Obviously, the visualizations you can request are dependent on the type of data. Where you've got coordinates, a map is an obvious thing. That's a scrollable, zoomable map. You can go in and out and zoom in on Brisbane itself, for instance. You can click on the individual dots to go to the Wikidata item. And you can have coloured dots and say, you know, make all the museums green and all the libraries blue, or whatever you might choose to do. And there is code that enables you to embed that in your own web pages. And the query will still run real time when people load your web page. We have another project within Wikidata. I've already mentioned the sum of all paintings, which is looking at artworks, but one that is growing very, very fast, currently makes up about a third of all of Wikidata, is Wikisite. The original plan with Wikisite was to import all the material that is cited in Wikipedia articles and store the metadata about the book or the journal article or the web page, and who wrote it and who published it and what year or what date and so on. But again, like Wikidata itself, once you start doing that, you realize it's easier to just throw in everything rather than pick out the things that are just cited in Wikipedia. So now we have volunteers who write computer programs who ingest lists of publications from people's ORCID profiles. You all know what I mean by ORCID? Good. From people's ORCID profiles, from publishers' databases, from the citations in the papers that are already listed, and obviously where this metadata is available electronically on the web, they can scrape it. If it's not, then some manual curation might go into it. But we're building this corpus of all the published data that might be cited in Wikipedia or cited elsewhere. Mostly at the moment it is academic papers, book chapters and conference papers, but we're then starting to add books, newspaper articles, and even citing tweets. We're not going to put every tweet in there, but the ones that are cited in Wikipedia will go in. We also then need to have items about the venues, the journals or books that the papers or the chapters are published in, or the conference where the paper was presented, about the publishers, the authors. We're already putting items in about people, of course, but now we're adding them for everybody who's ever published a paper, and I guess that will be some of you if you've been involved in library studies or similar. And we're able then to determine people's affiliations and who has co-authored with who, and who has cited which paper and which authors have cited which other authors. And we have a tool called Scholia. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. Some statistics. These are the number of triples, in other words, the number of statements, property value equals so-and-so in Wikidata. And the reason that is scored out, is I put that slide together last night, and this morning I updated it. So in about 12 hours, 800,000 new statements have been added to Wikidata. It's growing that fast. It's over 1 million statements a day are being added by these various computer programs and people manually editing things. And I'm not going to read all those statistics out to you, but just look how many commas are in some of those numbers. They're big numbers for how many DOIs we have, how many papers we know are cited by other papers. The interesting one for me is author name strings. That's where we know the name of the author, but we haven't yet associated it with a Wikidata item. So we know the author is Bill Smith or Janet Jones, but we don't know which Bill Smith or Janet Jones, and we have to do some detective work or find a website that will tell us that information. Maybe it'll be ORCID, maybe it'll be Google Scholar or something else. But still very, very big numbers and very much a work in progress. It's going to grow a lot more. So as I was saying, we have a tool called Scholia which does visualizations. This is a nice simple one. These are the people who co-authored papers with Marie Curie. It may not be complete because Wikidata is, as I say, a work in progress. And sometimes I find a person who's written some papers and I make a point of going and importing all their papers just to see the change. And you can do that, do one a day, and after the end of the week you've got a big corpus of people who've all written on the same topic or all co-authored with each other. But for Marie Curie it's quite a simple one. On the other hand, if I ask Scholia to give me all the papers that have art as the main topic, this is a very tiny part of a very big graph. And were this a live presentation, I would show you how you can move this around and drag one item into the center and see the relationships. I don't have time, unfortunately, to demonstrate every facet of Scholia. It's a wonderful tool for finding out who's worked with who's written on which topic. You get timelines and graphs, and if you have an ego like me, you can look yourself up if you have published papers and see whether they're in there and how they represent. Very good tool indeed, Scholia. And that also is under development with the community of volunteers. It's an open source project. You can write code and submit it, or if you can't code like me, you can simply request features and somebody will add it to the queue to be added if there is agreement to do so. So how do we get data into Wikidata? Well, like Wikipedia, you can edit it. You can go to a Wikidata item and add a statement manually, and those of you who are coming to the workshop later will see how we do that. You can create a new item. So the first thing to do if you're thinking about doing that is to check there isn't already an existing item, because duplicates have to be merged and that takes time. It doesn't matter if it does happen, but obviously if you check first, it saves everyone the bother later. And then you just click on Create Item, add an instance or a subclass of to start with, add a label, and then start adding all the other values. Just do it. Don't worry about it. Go and have a go. Try it out. The worst that can happen is somebody will delete it and tell you we actually didn't want that because it's not significant enough. But the barrier to entry is very low for Wikidata compared to Wikipedia. It's not a place to put your weekend business or your pet dog. But if you've got somebody who has written a paper, or you've got a paper, or you've got an author that you're interested in and you curate their work in the library, you can add an item about them if there isn't one already. Don't worry about notability, just go and do it. But if you have a bulk upload of data to do, though, that's going to take you too long. So we have a number of tools that enable you to import data in bulk, or that enable us to do it for you as Wikimedians. We can work together on that. And one of them is mix and match. And this is for catalogues of identifiers. So the example I have here, I don't know if you know it, is a website called invaluable.com, which summarizes art auction data. So It's very interesting to art historians because the paintings that it sells, or indeed other works, sculptures and so on, more often than not go into private collections. So it's a snapshot of it before it disappears from public view again. And it has lots of stuff by minor artists, because you and I can't afford a Monet, wouldn't be in this room if we could, but you can afford a painting by a lesser known artist, and so there's a lot of data in there that might not be in books in the library. So it's a very useful website from that point of view, and it acts as an authority control identifier of a sort. I mean, it's not a particularly strict. We keep finding that they've got some conflated identities and duplicate identities, but it helps. So what we do is we get a data donation from them in this case. Sometimes we might just scrape their website. Sometimes it might be a public data file that they've published as open data, which is a really good thing to do. Please do it yourselves. But we import that database into this mix and match tool, and we run a script overnight, or it literally sits on a server under somebody's bed in Cambridge in England. And we then use the software to make educated guesses at matches. If we have identifiers like VIAF identifiers in both databases, we can say it's a concrete match and we can just add it to Wikidata, and the computer will do that for us. But if we're matching on name and the fact that it's an artist, or name and a year of birth, say, that's not good enough, because you're still going to get some confused identities. So we put it into this tool, and a human being can go down clicking confirm or remove. You can see there that in the right hand column, green confirm, red remove. And that again is a nice little thing that you can do during a boring meeting, or on the bus on your tablet on the way home from work. Or I even tell people if they've got a loved one who watches dreadful television programs and you want to sit with your arm around them but you don't actually want to watch the program, get a tablet out and do some of this and make good use of your time. It'll be there forever. When you're doing this, it's for posterity, so it's a really useful thing to do. So that's one tool, mix and match. We have another one. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself again, I'm sorry. Looking at how we get data out of Wikidata, you can write tools. This is a Sparkle query-based web page done by a friend of mine called Martin Poulter at the Oxford University, at their Bodleian Library, to look at the collection of material in either in the Bodleian or in some of the museums associated with Oxford University. So all these images are on Wikimedia Commons, and all the data is on Wikidata, and that is a visualization of the collection which wasn't available to the curators of that collection until Martin wrote this tool. So they put their data into Wikidata, and in return they get better tools for analysing what's in the collection and accessing it, which they didn't have to pay to develop, and they don't have to maintain. All they have to do is provide the data and possibly update the data. If they acquire an extra artwork for this collection, they can go and create an item for it. But they don't have to do software coding and server hosting and all that sort of stuff as they would if they did this on their own website. But of course, this is on their own website. They don't have, the data isn't stored on their own system, I should say. And Martin also did this wonderful Astrolab Explorer. There aren't many astrolabes in the world in museums, certainly not many ancient astrolabes. So this doesn't just explore Oxford's collection of them, which are all in there, but also those in other collections. And you can do comparisons between collections. So you can look at all the astrolabes by the same maker, regardless of which collection they're in. All the astrolabes from the same decade, regardless of which collection they're in, because all that data is in Wikidata. And you can do this for whatever you want: lighthouses, windmills, paintings of cats, whatever you're interested in. You can build an explorer like this with a Sparkle query and a little bit of code skills. And what Martin's going to do with some of this is make his code available. So if you want to replicate it, you just change the labels and the values and the Sparkle query, but it will build a page about your collection or a collection of objects around the world that you have a particular interest in. And then we have QLabel. This is a marvellous demonstrator of how you can use just the labels in Wikidata. Never mind all the properties and the values, just those multilingual labels. So this is a restaurant menu in English, and you can see we have cheeseburger with beef and Emmental. You have macaroni and cheese, which is vegetarian. And anybody can write a website like that. You can do it in WordPress in 5 minutes. But with this one, you can press a button. There's a little drop down up here of the language, and you can select French, and now we have viande bovine, macaroni et fromage, The word vegetarian has become the French equivalent. I'm sorry for my dreadful pronunciation. And that's done from Wikidata. So the underlying code for this page doesn't have a word of French in it. It simply has the English and the QIDs and a little bit of script that says if the user has requested a language other than English, fetch the label from this QID on Wikidata and display it in place of the English text. Well, that could be a list of authors and their works on a library page. It could be a list of museums in Queensland on a tourism page, telling you what the museums have in their collection. This is the Japanese version, and you can see here the word T-bone steak, when I took the screenshot, it has been fixed since, is in English because it doesn't have a Japanese label, or didn't at the time, in Wikidata. So this system enables you to fall back to English, and that encourages a Japanese speaker to then go in and not to edit this page, but to go to Wikidata and edit the label, which makes it available for anybody who wants to know the Japanese word for a T-bone steak. So a very useful way of using the data in Wikidata. Now I was going to tell you about quick statements. This is how you can import data into Wikidata from a spreadsheet. So often, if you've got a list of heritage properties, or a list of books by a particular author, or a list of authors in a particular movement or genre, or from a particular town, or whatever it might be, you start with that in a spreadsheet, or in a database from which you can dump it into a spreadsheet very quickly. And this tool enables you to add the property identifiers, the Ps, and the values, the Qs. So if you want to say they were all born in Brisbane, you'd have the P for the place of birth, and then the Q ID for Brisbane in the next column. When you've done all that, you export it as tab-separated variables, and you throw that into the quick statements tool, and it will run in the background. So you can even start it running and then turn your PC off and go home and come back the next morning and 10,000 new entries have been created. A very powerful tool, very quick to learn. You can update items and delete items and merge items, as well as creating new ones using this tool. It is very powerful, and therefore it's very dangerous, because a vandal could come in and change all sorts of things. So we don't let people use it very fast. We throttle it when you're a new user. So you can get used to using it and demonstrate your competence. When you've done that, you can apply to have a setting changed in your profile on Wikidata, and it will run much faster. It doesn't run at the fastest possible, because that stops it working for everybody else. But it runs very fast, and like I say, you can leave it running in the background overnight or whatever. So that's quick statements. And I, or some of the Wikimedia Australia people who you're more regularly in contact with, are happy to help you with this or any of the other tools if you need help. We have an initiative called One Librarian, One Reference. And for those of you who aren't librarians, this applies to curators and archivists as well. And this is where we invite librarians. We used to do it every January, and then quite rightly some of your Australian colleagues pointed out that's your holiday period. So now we run it in January and May, and we're going to run it again next year in both of those months. We invite librarians to add a citation to Wikipedia. So all you need to do to take part in this is you find a citation needed tag on Wikipedia. There is a One Librarian, One Reference page at the top there which tells you how to do it. You find a citation needed in something that you know about, or you know you can look up in your library. You go and look up a citation, and you add that metadata to Wikipedia or to Wikidata. And then when you save your edits in Wikipedia, you use a hashtag so we can track them. And the idea of this is to get everybody to get hands-on experience, and thousands of librarians all around the world in all sorts of countries participate in this every year. So although it's a long way away, next January or next May we would invite you all to participate, and maybe as a library, Queensland State Library could get all the staff involved as a staff development exercise, or maybe if some of you are members of an institute for librarians across the country, you could publicise it and participate through that. We have a project called Wikisource, and this is linked to Wikidata, because if we have a Wikisource page about an author, that will be mentioned on the Wikidata page. But this is also something that might be useful for you to know about in your work, and which you may wish to contribute to. So here is the 1911 Encyclopaedia Britannica article on Brisbane in Wikisource. Wikisource is where we keep out of copyright or open license text. So whereas Wikimedia Commons is for images, this is for texts. And we have lots and lots of stuff on there, old encyclopedias, old journal articles, poetry and literature, and old textbooks and travelogues and things like that, all sorts of genres. And we have some very good tools in there. This is a book I'm working on at the moment. I'm transcribing a book about a natural historian from near where I live, back in England. But the tool presents you with the scan on one side. You upload the PDF to Commons, and you can get PDFs from places like the Internet Archive or from your own resources. And on the other side, you get the OCR version of the text, and you can see there's a couple of gaps and there's some red underlined words, some of which are scientific names which are correct, some of which are misspellings. And you go through and proofread it and save the page. And like mix and match, this is something you can do on a bus journey or at work when your boss isn't looking, or when you're at home keeping an eye on the kids or whatever. It's a useful way to contribute, and you can choose which works you transcribe. So if you've got a favourite author who's out of copyright, or you're interested in a particular place and you find an old travelogue about that place, you can do something that interests you, and of course you're reading the work while you're transcribing it. But it's a nice way to volunteer your time, and I quite often transcribe works if I've written a Wikipedia article about somebody and they've written something, or something has been written about them. It ties in quite nicely, because then when you have a citation in Wikipedia or in Wikidata, you can point the citation to the actual transcribed text in Wikisource and make it available at the same time. I mentioned Wikidata Projects earlier, where you can meet editors of like mind. Wiki projects also exist on Wikipedias for exactly the same purpose. This is the museums one that writes about museums, but there's an Australia one and probably a Brisbane one. There's an Australian roads one. There's an Australian football one. There was a cricket one, but they've been very quiet since the sandpaper incident. And we also have tracking categories. We have categories on Wikipedia to help you find things like buildings in Brisbane or wildlife of Australia, but we also have categories that are for tracking errors and issues. And so this is the arts articles needing expert attention, and we probably have literature articles, and we probably have Australian articles needing expert attention as categories as well. So you can help with this if you can look at this from time to time, or the equivalent for your specialisation. And when something pops up and you say, oh yes, I know about that, or I know we've got to work about that, I'll go and find the answer and fix the problem. Because on the talk pages of those articles on Wikipedia, somebody will have said, I need some help, I don't understand this, or I found two conflicting sources, or I can't find this, I know this is true, but I can't find a source that verifies it. So that's a way that librarians and archivists and curators can help out in their specialist field. There's always something to do on Wikipedia, but if you want to help out using your specialist skills, this is a good way to find out where to do it. Now a little bit of an advertisement. I run a project on Wikipedia called the Wikivoice Introduction Project, VIP. And what we do there is we ask people who have a Wikipedia article about them to record their spoken voice. So how many of you know somebody who is the subject of a Wikipedia article? Quite a few of you. Is anybody here the subject of a Wikipedia article? Not yet, one day. So what we asked them to do, if it was me, I would say, hello, my name is Andy Mabbett. I was born in Birmingham, England, and I've been a Wikipedia editor since 2003. So if you ask your friend or colleague who has a Wikipedia article to do that, it's not a big ask. You're not asking them to do an hour-long presentation. Believe me, that can be really onerous. You're not asking them to do a video, so they don't have to get their hair done and comb their beard or whatever. You can just go ahead and do it with a mobile phone, find somewhere quiet out of the wind and make a recording. It gives people a flavour of what they sound like, but most importantly, it gives the canonical pronunciation of their name, because the way they pronounce it is the correct one. So this is an appeal, please. If you know somebody with a Wikipedia article, go to this page. I will make the slides available and there's a link in it. Read up how to do it and make a recording. Like I said, just use your mobile phone, 10 seconds. We just want their name and a little brief bit of background. And those of you who speak 2 languages can translate articles between Wikipedias. So this is where we have a tool where you present the 2 languages side by side. You use a Google translation or something similar, and then you go through and check and correct it. That's another way in which you can contribute. Now I ought to talk a little bit about the wider GLAM Wiki movement, which is the collaboration between Wikimedians and the GLAM industry, if I can call it that, the GLAM sector, and Wikimedians in residence, or Wikipedians in residence. You've had one here at the State Library, you've had Kerry. I've done this with a number of institutions. It's a great way to work. It happens all around the world now. It happens in very small museums and libraries, and it happens in big international institutions. There's no limit on how it works, and every one is different. Every Wikipedian in residence works differently, and every residency I've held has been different to all the others. And you don't have to have a Wikipedian in residence to do all the things I'm about to tell you about, but it helps. But you can just work with your local Wikipedia volunteer community on a more loosely structured basis. You can have a Wikipedian in residence who is a volunteer, or a full-time salaried professional, or somebody who's working on a contract or a short-term temporary employment. All of those things have already been done. Sometimes it's students, sometimes it's retired people, sometimes it's people like me who earn their living as consultants and do a bit of that on the side. So as a Wikipedian in residence, when I work with an institution, and indeed other Wikimedians in residence when they do, first thing I do is talk about strategy and planning. So I can sit down with a management team and say, well, why are we doing this? What do we get out of it? What are the risks for you and how do you mitigate them? We don't just come straight in and start editing Wikipedia. There's more to it than that. I offer staff training, because getting you to understand how to actually edit Wikipedia and Wikidata, like we're going to do later on, is important, A, if you're going to do that, but also B, if you're going to work with other people who are doing it. So you understand the protocols and the community ethos and what isn't possible. So even if you never edit again, having undergone that training is a useful developmental exercise. And if for those of you in management positions, I would strongly urge you to consider getting your staff taught how to edit Wikipedia as part of their personal development, because it will give them a broader understanding of how Wikipedia and its sister projects like Wikidata work. And that's really important in the field that you're in, increasingly so when you see what people like the Tate Gallery are doing. We run editathons, and that's a horrible word because it sounds like marathon, which makes it sound like really hard work and a lot of pain. So sometimes we call them wiki parties or other names. But we have events where we get members of the public from your own community of volunteers and supporters, or people we do press and radio beforehand, and local Wikimedians, get them in together and edit Wikipedia articles on a theme. Maybe do, I don't know, women of the First World War from Australia, or poets from Brisbane, or whatever you might want to do. And beforehand, the Wikimedian in residence will work with the curators or the librarians to look at potential articles that could be written or improved, and to look at what resources you've got that can be made available on the day, possibly by photocopying or scanning them so precious papers don't get jam and beer all over them. And of course, if you do photocopies, you can give them to people to take home at the end of the day if they haven't finished work. And during the event, we will offer training to new Wikipedians and support to those who are not so new but not really used to it. And the experienced Wikipedians will get on with doing some work as well as delivering that training and support. Sometimes we bring in photographers. If it's in a museum, we take the covers off glass cases. If it's in a library, we might have a scanner and do some book scanning so we can put stuff on Wikisource. None of these, as I say, are always the same. Wikimedians in residence sometimes handle data and image uploads. I've already talked about how we do that in Wikidata, but we sometimes sit and work together on scanning images or uploading the images that you've already got digitally. We have tools for that as well to do them in bulk. We work with education, so we sometimes work in universities and teach people to edit Wikipedia, and they write articles about what they've studied, and they get the articles marked instead of writing an essay, and that's a lot more fun for the tutors. And that's something you might consider for those of you who are involved in library studies academically, for instance. And we run lots of other projects besides. So if you can think of an interesting way to work with Wikimedia, let's talk about it. Or if you can't, ask your local Wikimedians to come up with some ideas. One of the residencies I did was with a tiny art gallery in Birmingham. Their archives and stores take up about half the size of this room. And then they have a couple of exhibition spaces. And they had recently bought and had conserved and photographed a sketchbook by the family who started their organisation over 200 years ago. And they allowed us very generously to upload all the digital images at the highest resolution to Wikimedia Commons and use them on Wikipedia. And I wanted to show you this one today because it underlines a point very well. This is a drawing of a village in Coventry near where I live called Allersley. And the art gallery who gave us this image to use think it's a marvellous artwork. Look at the lines, look at how skillfully it's drawn. And that's all very true. But as a Wikipedian, I look at it and think, right, we've got an article on Allersley, and now it's got a concrete bypass, flyover going through it off the bypass, and no timber frame buildings like this. So this is an important historical record to go on the Wikipedia article. And the point that I'm trying to illustrate with this is that often a Wikipedian will see things in your collection in a different way to the way you do because of your librarian or curatorship background. And we can sometimes say, well, yeah, that's interesting, but we can also use it over here, or we can also tell this other story with it. So they're not just there to do the clerical work, but they're there to actually help you look at a different approach to your collection. And please bear that in mind when you're working with Wikipedians. Coming to the close of my talk now, some ways to keep in touch. We have a monthly newsletter called This Month in GLAM, which you can get delivered to your talk page on Wikipedia or Wikidata, or you can get by email, or you can have as an RSS feed in your RSS reader. It's very good. As you can see here, there is an Australia report every month. Likewise for many other countries. There is a separate Wikidata report, I write that one, and a sort of overarching special reports occur sometimes. It's always worth reading the other countries' reports as well as the Australian one, because that's where you get the ideas that you can borrow. Okay. And we have some social media. For those of you who use Facebook or Twitter, there are Wikidata and GLAM Wikidata discussion areas where you can get news and updates and ideas and make contact with other people who might be interested. That's the end of my presentation. You have my contact details there. I'll answer questions in a moment, but before I do, please, those of you who are not coming to the workshop after the coffee break, have a go at editing Wikidata. If you've got a Wikipedia account, it's the same account. If you haven't and you sign up, it works in both of them. Just go and add a citation. Go and add a label or a description to an item that doesn't have one. Click on the random item button in the top left-hand corner and do that a couple of times till you find something where there's a gap that you can fill. Get your hands dirty and it'll make so much more sense to you than me just talking about it. Thank you very much for your time. Questions? Lady here?
I'm just wondering how well Wiki stuff and Google play together.
Right, that's a very big question. When you look at Google search results, sometimes in the top right-hand corner, they have their equivalent of an info box, and sometimes that is taken directly from Wikipedia, and sometimes it's taken directly from Wikidata. We know they do that because they've told us that, and we can measure it. We can see specific phrases and sometimes mistakes appearing there, so we know that's where it's sourced from. But we don't know exactly how they do it because some of it's trade secrets which they don't share. We also know that sometimes they say, here's a bunch of money, thank you very much for the good work you're doing, and they give us a big donation. So they obviously appreciate what we're doing. And we know that the results you get from Alexa, not just Alexa, but all the equivalents from other suppliers like Apple's equivalent as well, and Amazon's, they also come from Wikidata and Wikipedia in part. I mean, they use other sources as well. We also know that Wikipedia features very highly in Google search results. And if you write a brand new Wikipedia article, press publish and go and search, it will be the third or fourth result. And within a day, it'll be the top one. So they respond very quickly to things we do on Wikipedia. And that's a measure of the quality of what we do and how thoroughly we cite and give evidence for what we're doing.
Do they also contribute back the other way? I'm just thinking about like their arts and culture project.
Some of what they do we can use because it's in the public domain. So things like their Google Art project, if they've digitized pictures or they've digitized books and they're out of copyright, we will use them. But we do that like any other user. You go to the web page and copy it or whatever. There are other organizations that work closely with us. The Internet Archive I mentioned. They're in the process of archiving web pages that Wikipedia cites. They scroll through Wikipedia automatically with computers, looking for new citations to web pages and adding them to the list of pages that they will back up in their own archive. And there are others that do that. And the guy who initiated Wikidata, the actual founder of it, now works for Google because they obviously appreciate the skills and talent he's got.
Hi, Andy, thanks. I'm a data journalist with the ABC, and one of the things we do a bit, and I'm trying to do more of, is crowdsourced inputs into journalism. Mm-hmm. And Wikidata strikes me as something that's had its data structures thought through to an enormous degree already, and one of the things I think we struggle with is sort of where to store data and how to structure it. Yeah. And could you see Wikidata being a useful data store for crowdsourced information? And I just wonder how granularly.
If you can cite it, you can put it in Wikidata. So if you're having people go out and, I don't know, measure the rainfall or the sunshine every day and add those statistics somewhere, then no, we wouldn't put that in Wikidata. You could put that in Wikimedia Commons, and you can link to it and refer to it in Wikidata. So Wikimedia Commons will store tab-separated files from a spreadsheet as a data file, and you can then reference it from Wikidata. On the other hand, if you've got people who are combing through, I don't know, digitized ship's logs from the 1800s, then that's a citation, and you can put the material finding there into Wikidata. So perhaps we ought to have a slightly longer conversation about exactly what you're trying to achieve and how. Question behind you?
Yeah, I was curious with your use of quick statements. There's, like, for example, many images added to Wikipedia Commons, and I see for your Australian identifiers you have things like the Queensland Heritage Register IDs and lots of IDs. Yes. Is there a process of associating the IDs with the images?
That's part of the Structured Data on Commons project. So there will be, a lot of the tools that work for Wikidata at the moment will be adapted for that project as it comes on stream. And conversely, there are tools that will help you to find an image to illustrate a Wikidata item and therefore to illustrate all the linked Wikipedia articles. I didn't mention, by the way, that one of the things Wikidata does is it acts as the bridge between all the Wikipedia articles on one subject in different languages. So the article on Claude Monet in English and in French and Dutch are all linked from the Wikidata item. And now when you look at the left-hand side of the Wikipedia article on a desktop browser, you see all the languages that the articles are available in. That's drawn from Wikidata. And so where you have an image associated with an article, if people haven't manually added images to an article, there are tools that enable the images to automatically appear from Wikidata. So we do that a lot with species of living things. So moths and beetles, there's just thousands and thousands of them. And in the Wikipedia in, I don't know, say Indonesian or Javanese, we'll have a very short article on a species of moth that only occurs in the United Kingdom or in America, but it will draw in some of the data, all the identifiers and the image from Wikidata. So if you find a Wikidata item with no image, add the image to that item, it will then appear on several Wikipedias all at once. And there are tools that help you that automatically suggest Wikidata items with no images and likely matches for images based on the image file name, and you click yes or no.
The properties. I just noticed in the properties when you're going through the data structure and some of the searches that there may be, have you got ones around time period? Because things like, say, that search on museum, that's a very now answer, but we know from libraries trying to manage the changes of organisation names, their locations, all things which are very time dependent.
You can create a Wikidata item, for instance, about a museum that closed 100 years ago and put the end date on. And you can write a query that says, I only want this window or I want all time.
Well, actually, they're related. It's the same institution that got renamed.
Yeah, we do that as well. We have an official name with a start and end date as a qualifier. For people, we have Flurit and Flurit start and Flurit end, where you only have an idea of when they were active rather than when they were born and died. Yeah, we have all that.
Hopefully most of you know that in the past State Libraries hosted a QWiki Club, a monthly QWiki Club, and that sort of slowed down due to some organisational changes and structures, but we'll be bringing that back to life. And I think with all the things we've learnt today, there's multiple aspects, so there'll be something that touches all of your hearts, I'm sure. Okay. And we'll be sharing those Wiki Club ideas, and if you're running Wiki Clubs in your own institution, please share them and make sure they go on the Australian GLAM newsletter, because it's something we should be sharing across the world. So please join me in thanking Andy for his amazing.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And do make use of my contact details, especially if you have questions and we don't have time to address them today.